Hey, this is John. Thanks for joining me for this video today. In this video, I'm going to continue weathering Wave's 1/20th scale Super Armored Fighting Suit Mark III Recon type Rapoon. Now, if you saw the last episode, that was where I covered doing the panel lining and chipping and rust stains. Now, one of my goals in that video was to be as restrained as possible with my chipping. I can tend to go overboard with it a little bit. So I wanted to be fairly restrained with my chipping so that that one aspect of the model would not overrule everything else, I guess you'd say. And I felt like I came out doing pretty good with that. It's not my usual chip job. To my eye, it still looks less than chipped. But what I'm planning on doing is, in the effects that I'm going to add in this video, then I can look at it as I get near the end and see, do I want to add a few more chips here and there. One area that I did, I guess you'd say chip heavily, was I did rust effects on this back plate and on this exhaust cover. That was a lot of fun to do. So if you like the way this looks, be sure and check out that video so you can see how I did that. But it was a fairly easy process, but it was a lot of fun to do. So that's the goal of this video, is to get this model finished up by adding lots of streaks and fluid effects and stains and grime and dirt and everything else. And I want to start off the last half of the weathering process by going in and adding some streaks. Now, there's a lot of ways to add streaks to your model, and these streaks represent anything from the effects of sitting out in the rain to, something leaking and then dirt clinging to it later. You look at any used vehicle that's been sitting outside, it may have just a light streaked appearance. If you look at any one section, I remember one time there was a piece of, it was like a bulldozer sitting in the parking lot of my office complex. And I just went and I very deliberately was looking at it, and I just picked like one 3-foot section, 3 feet wide, maybe a foot tall. I mean, I just visually picked that out. And I stood there and looked at it, and across that 3-foot span, there were probably, I counted that I could easily make out 15 different distinct colors of the yellow that it was painted, all because of various levels of streaking. So I want to add some of that on there. You can do this with oils. You could do the dot filter. You could thin your oils and just paint the streaks on. You can do this with enamels. Today, I'm going to do this with acrylics. Now, I like using these Vallejo model washes because they dry fast. Sometimes if I put on, say, dot filters, I have to give it a day to dry if I'm really going to be doing more stuff over it. But with these acrylics, I can put them down and just keep working. In fact, one of the things I like to do is I'd like to do a process of putting down as many acrylics as I can for, I guess you'd say, the rougher base weathering, and then on top of that go in and add oils. So I make oils the last step, so that once I'm finished with the oils, I can set it aside and go, okay, it's done. And they just dry at that point, so I don't have to worry about adding things over them. But I'm going to use these. Now, if you're thinking, well, those are just very thin paints, I'm not sure if they're paint or pigment, but when I put them in my palette, I used some a few days ago on another project, and I put them in the palette, and I set the palette aside, and I did other stuff, and I came back to it last night, which it had sat for 3 days. They were still sticky. So there's something in there, some kind of extender, some kind of agent in there that makes them stay viable for a lot longer than just normal acrylic paints. So I don't know what it is, but I like using them. Now, what I've got here is this is the desert color here, and then I've got the gray here, and then this is just a mix between the two. Now, if you're using these, you have to stir them a lot because the color in them, the pigment in them, settles very quickly. Now, once you stir them, they're right back up, and you can use them as needed. But they do settle very quickly. But all I do is I get them on this, and this is just a cheap nylon liner brush. This is what I like using for this. And I get most of the product off, and then I just go in and with just a quick flick, start flicking down the side of the model. You can go in and do a much more deliberate, I guess you'd say, painting on process. That works too. It tends to leave more color behind. If that's what you want to do, of course, do it. The way I like to do it is to leave less color and then build it up, because I think that makes for a better overall appearance. When you're working with acrylics, and if you watched my videos before, you're probably going, I know what he's fixing to say, but I'll say it anyway in case somebody hasn't heard it. When you're working with acrylics, it's an additive process. Oils and enamels tend to be subtractive, and what I mean by that is, if you'll remember from the previous video, like around this fuel cap here, I put in a bunch of oil and then I went in and blended it away. I took oil away to end up with that look. With acrylics, because you can't blend them as easily. They can be blended actually if you work fast and you're comfortable with using them. But they tend to work better if you add more color on top of color. So you'll see I'm just continuing to do these streaks like this. And now I said I was going to do it fast, but I'm slowing down because I'm adding a little more color. But this will leave you a streaked appearance. It's very similar, as I've said, to a dot filter, but at the same time, it is a little different. I like the difference. I've actually used both the acrylic streaking and dot filtering on the same model because I think they give some different looks to it that are worth trying out and applying to your model. But this is all the process is. It's quick, it's easy. I think it looks pretty good. Up on the top surfaces, I start stippling it in like that. These go on more opaque than they dry. When this dries, you'll be able to see the color, but it won't be quite that opaque. And I don't know if you can notice, but the side is already starting to dry. So I can work this section and then work over here on this section, and when I come back, I can do another layer on top of that. And that's all this is. It's just building up layers of streaks and color. And because it dries so fast, you get the opportunity to put on some product, check how it looks, add more, change colors, do whatever you want, and really keep track of the process. See up there where I put that on? You see it's already drying, much more transparent than it went on. So this wash here, I really highly recommend getting these because they are a great addition to any arsenal and modeling arsenal. And if you do get somewhere you don't want it or it's a little too heavy, if you go in there fairly quickly before it gets too dry, 3 or 4 minutes, when you see that happens, just dip your brush in water, clean it up, come back in, and you can blend those in with a little water. So they're not permanent once you put them on there. You have a little bit of working time, not near as much as with oils and enamels, but you can use them. So I'm going to continue going around the model and adding these streaks to it and show you what that looks like on the other side. All right, I want to do some fluid staining, and this is going to represent, it could be oil, it could be gas, it could be diesel, it could be hydraulic fluid, it could be some future space fluid that we don't know what it is. The point is you want fluid leaks because that's what the eye expects to see on a beat up piece of military equipment, which is what this is. Now, what I'm going to be using here, again, I'm going to use some acrylic products, and these are from Vallejo. I'm going to be using this is from their Weathering Effects line. I'm going to be using fuel stains, oil stains, and petrol spills. Now, you can see that they're basically black brown, and reddish brown. That's what the colors are. Even though, for instance, even though this one says petrol spills, you don't have to use it for petrol, for gas. It's just a dark color. I suspect these are that the color in these comes from inks because of just the way they behave and how transparent they are. These are glossy. The petrol spills and the oil stains are gloss. So they look wet when you go on. They will stay glossy. If you don't want them to stay glossy, just touch them with a bit of matte varnish, thin down. You can just do that by brush and it will matte them down. Another thing these are really good for, and I've tested this over and over. It's not something I've done once or twice. I've done it on dozens of models. And I've even done this test side by side to see if I could tell a difference, and I could not. This works just like Nuln Oil. This works just like Agrax Earthshade, the gloss versions of both. So they can be used and they behave exactly as those two products do. The difference is that in this Vallejo product, you're going to get however many ounces it is. Hang on while I look that up. Okay, yeah. You get 40 milliliters here. The Vallejo pots, or the Citadel pots, I want to say they hold 13 or 15, but essentially you can get 2 times more from this at, if I remember, it's either a little less or maybe about the same cost. So just saying. Now in terms of application, you can put them on neat if you want a really heavy stain. For instance, I had done when I was doing the panel lining, I had really heavily put in some panel line and left some of it there because I knew that I wanted to develop a really good leak there. Now I can go in with this unthinned and just begin putting that in around here. Now remember the distinction between acrylic and oils and enamels. Oils and enamels are generally a subtractive process. You put the product on and then you refine it and move it around and wipe it off and things like that. With acrylics, it's an additive process. For the most part, where you put it is where it stays. So keep that in mind as you're using these. But I'm going to use this here unthinned because I want to really develop this heavy stain. And one of the beauties of this is I can go over where these oils were. And these oils have been drying. The last time I worked on this was probably a month ago. You can go over this with the acrylic product, and because of its transparency, it will let that previous layer of oil shine through, and you can get a really cool effect. The more, my theory of weathering is the more layers you have, the more realistic it's going to look. And using different products like this lets you take advantage of what each product brings to the table. So keep that in mind as you're buying products and as you're working with weathering and things like that, that there's a lot of opportunities to use a lot of cool stuff, and you don't have to confine yourself to just 1 or 2 products. An example, I saw this yesterday on social media somewhere. Somebody had built a model and they did a good job on it. They put it together and glued it and sanded off the seams, and I mean all of that was good, and they painted it. And then it looked like what they did was took some oils and just, to my eye, it just looked like they smeared them around randomly in different vectors, going this way and that way and all of that. And they, you know, they said, here it is, what do you think? Now, they weren't saying this is the best thing ever. I mean, I'm not going to, you know, say that they were, you know, acting like it was a fabulous piece of modeling. It was obvious that this was somebody fairly new to it. But the biggest thing in my mind that I was looking at that I thought it lacked, aside from technique, that will come, but I think where most people, when they're getting started, what they miss is they miss on multiple layers, on multiple colors, on contrast and shadow and highlight and things like that. Quick sidebar from my rabbit chase here. I'm going to dip into this thinner over here that's a little bit off camera, and I'm just going to go in now that I've done this, and I'm going to thin that out and let that run. So you can do that. You can clean up this stuff while it's still wet. You're essentially doing wet blending like you would do with acrylics. But to get back to my rabbit chase while I'm working, I think that what I see is that too often people, they think weathering is one-dimensional. They get one product. They get Tamiya weathering powders, or they get some Starship filth, or something like that, and they add that in, and in their mind that constitutes weathering. And while, you know, again, when you're learning, that's all well and good, but I think if somebody, even early on, if they would just, I always try to urge people, just use 3 products, 3 different colors, maybe a dark, like these, you know, a black, a brown, and a reddish brown. If you do the same things that you see somebody do on their first or second model with just multiple colors, it's going to look so much better. So anyway, enough of that rant. You know, and as always, if using one color is how you're having fun, then go with it. Don't worry about anything I say, because it's fun that's the main thing. Back to this. You can mix these colors. You can blend them together to get different tones. You can put one over the other, but they're really easy to use, and they give a really nice look. And especially if you want some wet stains, they will definitely do that for you. They carry the ball down the field, and they look really good, and they give you some tonal difference that you don't see with some of the other products. So I'm going to continue doing this and see how it turns out. Okay, I know I'm bad about saying I'll show you how that turns out, and then I immediately break in and say, oh yeah, let me show you this. But hey, let me show you this. Another way that I like using these, especially where there's an obvious place for a fuel stain. We've got this, what I assume to be as a fuel filler cap. I'd already put some of the oils around it, knowing that this was going to be coming, that this weathering was going to be coming. Because these are lacquers and oils and enamels, this airbrush thinner won't really hurt them. This is just Vallejo airbrush thinner. And what I like to do is pre-wet an area with the airbrush thinner and get it fairly saturated in there. It may not stick perfectly to it because of the underlying surfaces, but I just put some on there. And then what I can do is I can come in, and I'm going to choose this lighter color here to contrast with the darker that's already there. And I can put that in there. And I don't know if that shows on camera, but the color just flows through it. Now there's only a little bit of color there, but I can keep adding that, and it gives a realistic looking stain, a streak, because it is a streak. Now, the reason I put it on very wet is because right now this color that I'm putting in is going to distribute itself through the standing fluid that's here. But what will happen is when it dries, it will leave the color behind, and we'll get hopefully a very pleasing pattern that will look like a stain. And it may be subtle. I may do this several times to get that built up like I want. But I think it's a really cool way to get a realistic looking stain of something running down, because it's literally running down the model, and so you'll have less of the color here, and it flows down like that. And as it dries, I may touch in just a little here and there and go back and add it in. But I think that's a really fun and cool technique for adding stains to your model. All right, the last thing I want to do is do some earth effects mostly along the feet, maybe the lower part of the legs, a few splatters up higher to represent dirt, grime, you know, something like this is going to be, if it's stomping through a mud puddle, it's going to make some heavy splashes. It's going to get some dirt on it. As someone who has been out in the field in a military sense, in the rain, in the mud, the stuff goes everywhere. You're out there long enough, you get to a point where, I remember one time digging some fighting positions in South Georgia, and it was raining and mud everywhere, and it got to the point where pretty much from about the waist down, we were just covered in mud. We had mud splatters all over us, but from the waist down, we were wet and just completely covered in mud. So that happens. Now, when you're putting mud and earth effects on a model, as with anything, you want to consider scale. Now, you may want to consider it and go, I don't care about it, and then move on. That's fine. If you're wanting to be concerned about scale, however, then some things to think about. For instance, on a 1/35 or 1/48 scale tank, you will see some mud texture on that tank in that scale. It makes sense because they collect a large amount of dirt and grime, and even in that size, you're going to see some texture. But in a 1/48 scale figure, or, you know, maybe in a 1/35 you're going to start seeing it, but, you know, 1/48 scale, you might not see any actual texture on the feet or the lower legs of any figures in it. Well, these things are in 1/20th scale, so I think it's very appropriate to put some level of texture on them. And the way I like to do that is using these Vallejo pigments. Now, there's a lot of different products that you can use for this. Some products come with both the medium and the texture already built in. Like, I know Citadel has a product called Sterling Battlemire, which is essentially like mud in a jar, and it works great. I don't want that heavy of an application of mud, but I do want there to be some texture. Now, if I just apply these pigments on, then it's going to do nothing but stain it, which can be good for a base, but it's not going to necessarily leave clumps of dirt in any way. And if it does, as soon as you tap the model, it's going to fall off. And a lot of the methods that are used for what are called pigment fixers don't always permanently affix it to the model. I want it to be permanently affixed. So what I like to do is to grab another of the Vallejo products that I've been using, these washes, and use those both to form a basis for the application and then to put the pigments on, and then to use it to fix the pigments to the model, because when I wash this over it, it will fix the pigment to the model, so that yes, you can scrape it off, but you have to do more than just tap it or rub your finger against it. You have to deliberately try to scrape it off, so it gives it much more durability. Now, the thing to remember, whenever you add any kind of liquid to your pigments, it may change the color. Now, they may dry back to the color that they were at, but keep that in mind. So as you're working on it, if you're going to add any kind of fixer or any kind of liquid over it, remember, it's not necessarily going to end up looking just like it does in the bottle. Quite often, you'll see modelers, and I've done this, the pigment will be applied in such a way that it can clump up, not for the color, but so that it can then be painted over. Sometimes pigments are just used for texture alone, and in that case, the color of the pigment is not necessarily a concern. So there's a lot of ways of using those, and I'm going to try and demonstrate those here in just a couple of minutes. Another, and this is a minor point, yet it's a very important point. When you're using pigments, I recommend you cover your workspace in some kind of newspaper, paper towel, something, because this stuff, you can be as careful as you want. This stuff will go everywhere if you're not careful. So that's why I've got this paper towel down, to make sure that I'm not creating any problems with getting my workbench covered in pigments. Now, to get started, I'm going to add some some washes to the bottom of the feet, just as a foundation for the earth effects. And what I've got here is Vallejo's Desert Dust and European Dust in the palette. And then I keep, when I'm doing this kind of work, I keep a whole bunch of brushes standing by because I like just switching back and forth between them and using different ones for different colors. And it's so much easier just to have them sitting by, ready to go, not having to suddenly remember, try and remember to reach over and grab for one. Now I'm going to start in first by adding in some of this lighter color, and this is to represent dust. Now I've already used it for streaking on the model, but I want this to go in a little heavier to be dust. Now as I'm looking at that, I don't like the color. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put in just a little of this European dust to that to take a little bit of the yellow out of it. Yeah, to me that looks more like dust and less like a banana exploded. There. Now you'll see I'm not being light with this. I'm going in kind of heavy. This stuff goes on more opaque than it will dry. When it dries, it's going to be more transparent than it is right now. But I put it on, and I'm just trying to kind of think about, okay, if he's walking along, yeah, the whole suit may get covered in dust, but that's why we did the streaks and things initially. This is to represent the dust that gets in around the feet and the lower part of the legs. So I want to be fairly heavy with the coverage, which I think I've said now for the third time. Hey, did I mention I'm going to be heavy with the coverage here? But this is just a foundation for the dust, so let me get this done and we'll keep moving on. All right, you can see that's added some dust texture or some dust effect to the lower part of the legs and especially the feet there. Really, I mean, all I basically did was added a filter to it, if you want to get technical about it. It's just some additional color. Now, what I've got in my palette is the European Earth pigment right here. And this is kind of funny. Instinctively, when I picked this up, I shook it. You don't need to shake your pigments. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start by applying. There's several ways of applying this. One of the ways is you can go in and you can start applying it this way, just dry, like this, and get it, it goes wherever you want. You decide how dirty or how muddy something is. And you can leave it in clumps, or you can work it in, like I'm doing a little bit here. Whatever effect you're going for. If you work it in more, it's going to give more of a dusty appearance. If you leave the clumps on there, it's going to give more of a dirty appearance. So whichever you're going for is what's right. Now, once you have that on there, and when you're applying your pigments, one, use an older nylon brush. Two, use it for dry pigments only, because once it gets wet, it's going to impart that moisture to everything. Now, what I want to do now, and this kind of acts as a fixer, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to get some of this darker wash, and I'm just going to start touching it around the pigment. You don't want to flood it. You want to give enough that it's going to fix the pigment in place. I don't know if I can get that in focus well here, but it's going to fix the pigment in place. It's going to leave a little bit of the texture. It may dissolve some of it. And if it dissolves more than you want, then go back in and just apply some more. Now, as I'm working through this, I may have to go in and make multiple applications. Now, I'm not going to touch my brush to this. Normally, if I was doing this without the camera, I would just set this down and tap it, but I'll do it with, I'll try and do it one-handed. What's the sound of one hand clapping? Pretty much this. but you can add more on top of that and that will stick. And so you can continue refining how it looks as you're doing this. And I'll just go in and touch that. And again, my daughter was telling me, Dad, it's not capillary action, it's capillary action. And I'm like, I'm not sure, because I've always said it that way. Anyway, you can see that this is already drying here on the heel. That, to my eye, that looks like mud. I think it's a scale appropriate texture, and you can use this same stuff. This does some great rust effects. It does great effects anytime you want some texture. This will do it. And of course you can then go back over the top with additional colors if you want to add some additional streaks or dust or things that just look a little different, additional tones like that. But I just work it in that way, and it looks pretty cool, I think. All right, I've given that a few minutes to dry. I actually, to tell you how well this works at adhering the pigments to the model with the wash, I used my hairdryer to dry this, and it didn't blow any of it off. There's still a little bit that's still drying, although that's actually some gloss effect from an oil streak that I put on there. But you can see how, I mean, it looks like mud to me. But you can also see, I think, how this, if you put rust tones over this, could make for a really interesting rust bloom. So this has a lot of application in terms of adding texture to your model. You can also see how I got this stuff all over here. So keep that in mind when you're doing this. Okay, now a final step that I want to do in terms of weathering this. What I want to do is add some splatters. So I'm going to get some of this wash on here, and I want to give it a test splatter here to see if I like the pattern, and I do. And I'm just going to aim for the lower feet. Now, if I get it higher up, I may even move a little higher up. If I get it higher up, that's okay. I want a splattered effect, because that'll go in over the top of that, and it'll just add more life to the model. Let's take a look at that. Yeah. You can see when it dries, it's just going to add a little bit more character to it. Now I'm going to, off camera, I'm going to work to get a little higher up on the leg, and I may mix these two colors to try and get a little bit of contrast. But that motion of just going in, getting most of the color off your brush, testing it on your paper towel until it's developing the pattern you want, and then just going in and adding that on. And you can do multiple colors. You can do multiple layers of this. It really brings, in my mind, it brings life to the model. So adding that along the way, I think just really helps it out. But I'll go through and get that added in across the lower part of the model, and we'll take a look at how that ends up. Okay, he's just about finished. I've got all the stains and streaks and grime and dirt and chips and rust and everything else on him that I want. The only thing that remains, really, these stupid hoses. I don't like these. They make them, Wave makes them out of a plastic that repels all known substances. There's nothing, this stuff is a politician's dream. Nothing can stick to it. Now, maybe that's a little exaggerated, but I've tried painting them with acrylics. I've tried putting primer down on them. I've tried adding super glue to them. I've tried all sorts of nonsense to try and get these to where they're paintable. And if you do this, you move it around, the stuff just pops right off. So they can be frustrating to deal with, but here's how I deal with it. And some of this is, it's not some of it, but it's based on what I've seen in Lincoln Wright's videos. First, now this I don't know that I've seen Link do, because he tends to assemble the whole model and paint it and weather it together. I like doing it apart. I don't put these in to the leg ahead of time. I'd wait and do it after. And the way I do that is I just trim down the little part that plugs in there, and then it just goes right in like that. Now, it's not necessarily real solid, but I don't plan to be moving this thing around a lot, so I'm not too worried about it. And then, of course, I just plug it in up here. Now it's in place. Now what I do is I want to paint it. I wait and do any kind of painting or finishing on this until the very last thing, and I wait until it's in place so that I don't have to touch it, I don't have to deal with it. And let me show you a simple way that I've found to do this. All right, the first thing I do is I get my well-worn tube of oil brushers. This is Starship Filth, but you can use whatever color you want. And I just paint it on. Now, the reason I like using oils for this, when they dry, they're flexible. It doesn't mean that they can't come off of here, because I've tested it and they can. But when I put this on here, it's going to have a better chance of staying on there, much more so than acrylic paints or any of the other things that we can do to try and get our models to look good. So I just hit it with some oils. Now, you don't have to use oil brushers. I just use this because it's convenient. You could use modeling oils such as Abel-Tabel-Lungel 502, or you could use your Winsor & Newton or any other kind of wash. And what I'll do is I'll let that dry. I'll probably give it 24 hours to dry, and then I'll just go in with a dark oil wash over it to fill in the panel lines. But this is always the last step I do, so that this doesn't have to be touched. Again, I'll set it on the shelf. The only time this will get touched is if I sell this on eBay and send it out to the buyer, and at that point it's just going to do what it's going to do. There's not a whole lot I can do about it. Even putting some kind of overcoating over it won't necessarily keep it in place. I really wish they would give you an alternative for plastic parts for these, but it is what it is. But that's how I handle these. All right, well, I think I'm going to call this guy done. I'm pretty happy with how he turned out. I did find at the very end when I was putting all the parts on, I had somehow lost this clear piece that goes over the front here, and I had to make one up from some clear plastic and just kind of paint over it. So I've just kind of tacked that on there temporarily, and I'm going to see if I can find the actual kit part. But for the purposes of this video, I'm not worried about it. But you can see that I've got, you know, I think the rust looks pretty good. I'm happy with it. It's not the best rust you're ever going to see on a model, but you know, if I ever build a model that's better than anything that's ever been built, I either need to quit because I'm delusional, or I need to find a new hobby. You can see the fuel stain there. I'm real pleased with how that turned out. I like that a lot. And this rusting on the back, that looks like I wanted it to. And the mud around the feet, the dirt and the mud, and I mean, that just, I modeled this deliberately of how the mud looked when I was in the Army at Fort Benning in Georgia in the United States, and would come in from the field and that stuff would dry up, and that's how it would look. So I was real happy with that. I'm happy with how this remote power distribution unit showed up, or looks on it. If you didn't see the second, I think it was maybe it was the first one, but one of the previous videos, I decided to put these parts on here, and the premise is that instead of having a cable that sends power to the laser, that these two things take care of it remotely, that it's an experimental unit. I also put this part on. I deliberately put it on upside down because I thought the interesting detail was on the top. So I put that on there, gave it a little different color so it looked like it came from maybe a different suit. But yeah, I'm really happy with how this has turned out. It's a fun model kit. Building Maschinen Krieger is a lot of fun. There's a lot of freedom in doing it. The scale at 1/20th scale makes it really, really easy to weather. You don't have to worry about your weathering getting too out of scale because in this size, it works. It looks really good. So if you've not built one, this is definitely a kit to try. Any of the Maschinen Krieger kits, I think you're gonna enjoy. They're a little different. I know a few people that have tried them that have normally done aircraft and tanks and stuff like that. They tried them. A couple of them have told me that they really didn't like this polycap material for the joints and for the hoses. And that, in fact, for one of them, it was like, that was a deal breaker. It was like, I just don't even want to mess with that. So I get that, but if you take a few simple steps and just do like I did, just save it till the end, and especially with those hoses, put some oil paint on them, put a wash on them, don't touch them, leave them be. They'll be fine. But it's definitely a genre worth exploring if you have not, and if you have built these before, you know what fun they are. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate it, and especially to you folks who hang on till the end. I'm so glad that you're still listening, whoever you are. Thank you very much. There are links down below to the various social media platforms I'm on. Check those out and connect with me there. There's also a link to my blog. I have years of material, written material with photographs and things like that, how-to articles, mostly aircraft builds and stuff like that, but there's a lot of stuff out there. So if you've never checked it out, be sure and visit my blog. There's a subscribe button down here somewhere, and if you've not already subscribed, please click that button and the little bell so you'll be notified when I do put out a new video. And then there's also a link to Patreon. I have a Patreon account, and you can link to it down there and see the various levels that are offered and what rewards come along with those. And if you would be inclined, I would appreciate you checking that out and perhaps supporting me if you're able to. And for those of you who are already Patreon supporters, thank you so much. It is such a blessing to my family and I that you do so. It's what makes these videos, the equipment I have, the web servers, all of the things that I do, you make it possible. I would certainly build models anyway, but I could not do it at the pace that I do it with the materials and the kits that I do it in the way that I do it if it weren't for you. You make it possible. Thank you so much. With all that being said, I'll close as I always do. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.